Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was grateful for the Minister's earlier answer on the cadet expansion programme. Could he indicate at what point, if at all, expressions of interest from schools in non-priority areas will be accepted if insufficient applications are made from priority areas?
My honourable friend reflects on the problems of success. We do in fact have many applications from priority areas according to the 3 criteria that have been set out a number of times. So I can't make any firm promises, I'm afraid, for those who don't meet the priority criteria. We are firmly on track to deliver the schools we need.
Michael Dagger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Friday I was privileged to be invited to Burma Company, the 4th Battalion, the Yorkshire Regiment, based in Barnsley, to thank them for their service ahead of Armed Forces Day. Will the Secretary of State join me in paying tribute to the superb men and women there, superbly led by Major Darren Schofield?
Yeah, well, let me congratulate all those from the Armed Forces, including those from reserve units who took place at the key events in Cleethorpes, in Plymouth, in Glasgow, in Woolwich, and at many other locations up and down the country. We are proud of them, and we gave the public the opportunity to show their support.
Andrew Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Secretary of State reassure the House that, in contrast to the party opposite, morale in our armed forces remains high and desertion rate is very low?
I am happy to confirm that from our attitude surveys that we do every year. Morale is high, and the armed forces appreciate that with a growing defence budget every single year, they have much to look forward to.
Lastly, Greg Mulholland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Veterans Minister for listening to the plight of war widows penalised for remarrying. Could he give a sense of how long his review into this matter will take?
I hope to come back to the House and the honourable gentleman as soon as possible.
Order! Order! Will the member wishing to take her seat please come to the table?
I swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, her heirs and successors, according to law, so help me God.
Alan Khan, the member for Tooting, sir.
Thank you very much.
Order. Statement, the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the result of the EU referendum. Last week saw one of the biggest democratic exercises in our history, with over 33 million people from England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and Gibraltar all having their say. We should be proud of our parliamentary democracy, but it is right when we consider questions of this magnitude, we don't just leave it to politicians, but rather listen directly to the people. And that is why members from across this House voted for a referendum by a margin of almost 6-1. And while I talk about this House, let me welcome the new member for Tooting to her place. I think I'd advise her to keep her mobile phone on. She might be in the shadow cabinet by the end of the day. Mr. and I thought I was having a bad day. Mr. Speaker, let me set out for the House what this vote means, the steps we're taking immediately to stabilise the UK economy, the preparatory work for negotiation to leave the EU, our plans for fully engaging the devolved administrations, and the next steps at tomorrow's European Council. Mr. Speaker, the British people have voted to leave the European Union. It was not the result I wanted, nor the outcome that I believe is best for the country I love. But there can be no doubt about the result. Of course, I don't take back what I said about the risks. It is going to be difficult. We've already seen that there are going to be adjustments within our economy, complex constitutional issues, and challenging new negotiation to undertake with Europe. But I am clear, and the Cabinet agreed this morning, that the decision must be accepted and the process of implementing the decision in the best possible way must now begin. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, we have a fundamental responsibility to bring our country together. In the past few days, we've seen despicable graffiti daubed on a Polish community centre. We've seen verbal abuse hurled against individuals because they're members of ethnic minorities. Let's remember these people have come here and made a wonderful contribution to our country. We will not stand for hate crime or these kinds of attacks. They must be stamped out. Mr. Speaker, we can reassure European citizens living here and Brits living in European countries that there will be no immediate changes in their circumstances. Neither will there be any initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. The deal we negotiated at the European Council in February will now be discarded, and a new negotiation to leave the EU will begin under a new Prime Minister. Turning to our economy, it's clear that markets are volatile, there are some companies considering their investments, and we know this is going to be far from plain sailing. However, we should take confidence from the fact that Britain is ready to confront what the future holds for us from a position of strength. As a result of our long-term plan, we have today one of the strongest major advanced economies in the world. We are well placed to face the challenges ahead. We have low, stable inflation. The employment rate remains the highest it's ever been. The budget deficit is down from 11% of national income, forecast to be below 3% this year. The financial system is also substantially more resilient than it was 6 years ago, with capital requirements for the largest banks now 10 times higher than before the banking crisis. The markets may not have been expecting the referendum result, but as the Chancellor set out this morning, the Treasury, the Bank of England and our other financial authorities have spent the last few months putting in place robust contingency plans. As the Governor of the Bank of England said on Friday, the bank's stress tests have shown that UK institutions have enough capital and liquidity reserves to withstand a scenario more severe than the country currently faces. And the bank can make available £250 billion of additional funds if it needs to support banks and markets. In the coming days, the Treasury, the Bank of England and the Financial Conduct Authority will continue to be in very close contact. They have contingency plans in place to maintain financial stability, and they will not hesitate to take further measures if required. Turning to preparations for negotiating our exit from the EU, the Cabinet met this morning and agreed the creation of a new EU unit in Whitehall. This will bring together officials and policy expertise from across the Cabinet Office, Treasury, Foreign Office and business departments. Clearly, this will be the most complex and most important task that the British civil service has undertaken in decades. So the new unit will sit at the heart of government and be led and staffed by the best and brightest from across our civil service. It will report to the whole Cabinet on delivering the outcome of the referendum, advising on transitional issues and exploring objectively options for our future relationship with Europe and the rest of the world from outside the EU. And it will be responsible for ensuring that the new Prime Minister has the best possible advice from the moment of their arrival. Mr. Speaker, I know that colleagues on all sides of the House will want to contribute to how we prepare and execute the new negotiation to leave the EU. And my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, will listen to all views and representations and make sure they are fully put into this exercise. He will be playing no part in the leadership election. Turning to the devolved administrations, we must ensure that the interests of all parts of our United Kingdom are protected and advanced. So as we prepare for a new negotiation with the European Union, we will fully involve the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Ireland governments. We will also consult Gibraltar, the Crown Dependencies, the Overseas Territories and all regional centres of power, including the London Assembly. I've spoken to the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales, as well as the First and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland and the Taoiseach, and our officials will be working intensively together over the coming weeks to bring our devolved administrations into the process for determining the decisions that need to be taken. Mr. Speaker, while all of the key decisions will have to wait for the arrival of the new Prime Minister, there is a lot of work that can be started now. For instance, the British and Irish governments begin meeting this week to work through the challenges relating to the common border area. Mr. Speaker, tomorrow I'll attend the European Council. In the last few days, I've spoken to Chancellor Merkel, President Hollande and a number of other European leaders. We've discussed the need to prepare for the negotiations and in particular the fact that the British government will not be triggering Article 50 at this stage. Before we do that, we need to determine the kind of relationship we want with the EU. And that is rightly something for the next Prime Minister and their Cabinet to decide. I've also made this point to the Presidents of the European Council and the European Commission, and I'll make this clear again at the European Council tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, this is our sovereign decision and it will be for Britain and Britain alone to take. Tomorrow is also an opportunity to make this point. Britain is leaving the European Union, but we must not turn our back on Europe or on the rest of the world. The nature of the relationship we secure with the EU will be determined by the next government, but I think everyone has agreed that we will want the strongest possible economic links with our European neighbours, as well as with our close friends in North America, the Commonwealth and important partners like India and China. I'm also sure that whatever the precise nature of our future relationship, we will want to continue with a great deal of our extensive security cooperation and to do all we can to influence decisions that will affect the prosperity and safety of our people here at home. Mr. Speaker, this negotiation will require strong, determined and committed leadership. And as I've said, I think the country requires a new Prime Minister and Cabinet to take it in this direction. This is not a decision I've taken lightly, but I'm absolutely convinced it is in the national interest. Mr. Speaker, although leaving the EU was not the path I recommended, I am the first to praise our incredible strengths as a country. As we proceed with implementing this decision and facing the challenges that it will undoubtedly bring, I believe we should hold fast to a vision of Britain that wants to be respected abroad, tolerant at home, engaged in the world, and working with our international partners to advance the prosperity and security of our nation for generations to come. I have fought for these things every day of my political life. I will continue to do so, and I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, I would like to thank the British people for turning out to vote in the referendum in such high numbers. The vote was a reflection of the significance of the issue, but it was a close vote on the back of a campaign that was, too often, divisive and negative. These benches put forward a positive case to remain part of the European Union and convinced more than two-thirds of our own supporters. But the majority of people have voted to leave, and we have listened to and accepted what they've said. Many people feel disenfranchised and powerless, especially in parts of the country that have been left behind for far too long. Communities, Mr. Speaker, that have been let down, not by the European Union, but by Tory governments. Those communities don't trust politicians to deliver because for too long they haven't. So, instead of more extreme cuts to local services, which have hit the areas the hardest, this government needs to invest in those communities. Many of those areas are deeply concerned about the security of pledged EU funding. Can the Prime Minister give us any guarantees on those issues, as that money is desperately needed? Secondly, it's the issue of trust, and the tenor in the referendum campaign was disheartening. Half-truths and untruths were told, many of which key Leave figures spent the weekend distancing themselves from, not least the claim that the vote to leave would hand the NHS an extra £350 million per week. It is quite shameful that politicians made claims they knew to be false and promises they knew could not be delivered. Thirdly, real concern exists about immigration, but too much of the discussion in the referendum campaign was intemperate and divisive. And in the days following the referendum result, it appears we have seen a rise in racist incidents, such as the attack on the Polish centre in Hammersmith, which the Prime Minister quite rightly referred to, and sadly many other such incidents all over this country. I hope the Prime Minister and Home Secretary will take all action they can to halt these attacks, halt this disgraceful racist behaviour on the streets of this country. As political leaders, we have a duty to calm our language and our tone, especially after the shocking events of 10 days ago. Our country is divided, and the country will thank neither the benches in front of me nor those behind for indulging in internal factioning manoeuvring at this time. We have Mr. Speaker, we have serious matters to discuss in this House and in the country. And
I want to accommodate as many as possible of those colleagues who wish to question the Prime Minister. Matters are just slowed up if people make a lot of noise. I've got plenty of time. I don't know whether other people have. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does appear that neither wing of the Tory government has an exit plan, which is why we're insisting that the Labour Party be fully engaged in the negotiations that lie ahead. We need the freedom to shape our economy for the future and protect social and employment rights while building new policies on trade, on migration, environmental protection and on investment. I fully understand the Prime Minister is standing down in 3 months' time, but we cannot be in a state of paralysis until then. The Prime Minister is meeting the European Council tomorrow. I hope he's going to say that negotiations will begin so we know what's going on, rather than being delayed until October. We as a House have a duty to act in the national interest and ensure we get the best agreements for our constituents. Will the Prime Minister today confirm that in the light of the economic turmoil, the Chancellor will announce at least a suspension, preferably the termination, of his now even more counterproductive fiscal rule? What the economy needs now is a clear plan for investment, particularly in those communities that have been so damaged by this government and sent such a very strong message to all of us last week. Will he specifically rule out tax rises or further cuts to public services that were threatened in the pre-referendum? I welcome his assurances on the uncertainty felt by many EU nationals currently working in our economy, including the 52,000 who work so well and help our National Health Service to provide the service we all need. It is welcome that the Prime Minister is consulting with the leaders of devolved administrations, and I hope with the Mayor of London too, a city for which the implications are huge. We must act in the public interest and support measures to reduce volatility. I welcome market protections, but what about protections for people's jobs, their wages and their pensions? Can the Prime Minister make clear what plans are in place? The Chancellor spoke this morning to reassure the stock markets, though they clearly remain very uncertain. We understand that some measures cannot be discussed in the House, so will he give me an assurance that the Chancellor will provide private briefings to his opposite numbers on this matter? Finally, Mr. Speaker, on a personal note, may I say, Mr. Speaker, finally, on a personal note, I have many fundamental disagreements with the policies of the Prime Minister and his governments. Nevertheless, as he announces the end of his premiership, it's right to reflect that he led a government that delivered equal marriage against the majority of his own MPs, and he was right to do so. I want to thank him too for his response to the Bloody Sunday inquiry and how he reacted to the tragic murder of Joe Cox. We thank him for his service, although I'm sure we will enjoy many more debates and disagreements while he continues as Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me agree with the Leader of the Opposition that it was positive turnout was so high. I also agree with him that we do need to reach out to those people who haven't benefited from economic growth and make sure they feel that their economic security is important to us as well. But I don't agree with him that it's right to start to try and refight the campaign all over again. All I know, for my part, is I feel I put everything I could into the campaign that I believed in, head, heart and soul, and I left nothing out, and I think that was the right thing to do. Answering his questions on money that different areas of the country get, until we leave the EU, none of those arrangements change. So what has been set out in the budget and the payments and the rest of it, all of those continue. But as the negotiation begins properly for leaving, obviously, the next government will want to set out what arrangements it will put in place for farmers, for local authorities, for regions of our country. On intolerance and fighting intolerance, I absolutely agree with him. We must take all action we can to stamp this out. He asked about the Chancellor's fiscal rule and also future plans. What I would say is, look, we have not worked so hard to get the budget deficit from 11% down to below 3% to see that go to waste, and we must continue to make sure that we have a sound and strong economic plan in our country. For the coming months, that is my responsibility and the Chancellor's responsibility. In time, it will be the responsibility of a new government, and they will have to decide how to react if there are economic difficulties along the way. He asked if there could be private briefings for members of the front bench with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. As always in these arrangements, if shadow cabinet members want those sorts of briefings, they can have them. And can I finally thank him for his kind remarks and the fact that he hopes that we'll be debating with each other for some weeks and possibly months to come.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, when we acquire a new government that's decided what it means by leaving and draws up some detailed policy instructions for the committee of officials he set up, a great deal of detailed legislation on covering a whole variety of fields will start being submitted to this Parliament. Does my right honourable friend agree that we still have a parliamentary democracy, and it will be the duty of each member of Parliament to judge each measure in the light of what each man and woman regards as the national interest, and not to take broad guidance from a plebiscite which has produced a small majority on a broad question after a bad-tempered and ill-informed debate? And would he agree that we face months of uncertainty if we're not careful?
It's really not acceptable for people to make that level of noise. The right honourable and learned gentleman will be heard, and every member of this House will be heard. Let's accord the right honourable and learned gentleman the respect to which he's entitled. Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would my right honourable read, as a risk of uncertainty for a few months, causing very considerable difficulty, would he consider the possible first step of joining the European Economic Area, which was designed in the first place for countries like Norway and Iceland, where the great bulk of politicians wished to join the European Union, but could not get past the ridiculous hurdle of a referendum in order to get there? And that would at least could be negotiated, modifications, changes, if anybody can decide what they want after we get there, but it would give some reassuring order and stability to our economy and might begin to attract a little investment and future prospects for our country.
Well, let me thank my right honourable friend for his remarks. But my view is simple. This House shouldn't block the will of the British people to leave the European Union. But of course, we've now got to look at all the detailed arrangements, and Parliament will clearly have a role in that, in making sure that we find the best way forward, and that will be principally the job for the next government. But I do believe in parliamentary sovereignty and the sovereignty of this Parliament, and a lot of detail will have to be discussed and debated. But decisions like whether or not to join the EEA must be for a future government.
Mr. Angus Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the European Union. 62% of voters cast their votes to remain in the EU. Every single local government area in the country voted to remain in the EU. And in Scotland, we voted to remain because it really matters that we are in the single European market, because we value the free movement of people, of goods and services, because our EU citizenship rights matter, as do our legal safeguards for workers, for women and for parents. In Scotland, Mr. Speaker, we voted to remain because we are a European nation. And it really matters to us that we live in an outward-looking country, not a diminished Little Britain. In Scotland, we are now being told from Westminster that despite the majority against leave, we're going to have to do as we're told. We're going to be taken out of Europe against our will. Mr. Speaker, let me tell this House and our friends across Europe, we have no intention whatsoever of seeing Scotland taken out of Europe. That would be totally democratically unacceptable. We are a European country and we will stay a European country. And if that means we have to have an independence referendum to protect Scotland's place, then so be it. Thank goodness, Mr. Speaker, that we have a Scottish Government and a First Minister prepared to lead and seek to protect Scotland's place. And it is very welcome that this approach is being supported by opposition political parties across the Scottish Parliament. Meanwhile, Mr. Speaker, Project Fear has turned to Project Farce. Apparently those who propose that we should leave Europe have no plan. A senior Leave MP said, and I quote, "There is no plan. The Leave campaign don't have a post-Brexit plan." They went on to say, Number 10 should have had a plan. Meanwhile, UK share prices are so volatile that some stocks have temporarily been suspended and sterling has hit a 31-year low. Mr. Speaker, on one thing I hope we are all agreed, and that is that we take very serious note of the very disturbing series of racist incidents directed against our fellow citizens who happen to come from other European countries. I hope that we all, on all sides, totally repudiate these despicable acts and encourage the police and prosecuting authorities to do all that they can. Mr. Speaker, given the economic damage and uncertainty that is currently being caused, may I ask the Prime Minister the following financial questions? We welcome the actions of the Governor of the Bank of England to help provide certainty in difficult times. Can the Prime Minister confirm that the Governor has no plans presently to change his forward guidance on interest rates? The SNP will continue to support any sensible measures to deliver stability and confidence in the UK economy at this time. However, we want to be explicitly clear that this will not be used to further deepen the programme of austerity. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the lack of leadership from Whitehall over the past few days has been unprecedented. We recognise that any further drift or vacuum simply exacerbates uncertainty. We know the Prime Minister is planning to leave, and we wish him well, but can we have an absolute assurance that his government will finally start to take a firm grip of the situation we all sadly find ourselves in?
Well, first of all, what I say to the right honourable gentleman is our focus should be to get the very best deal for the United Kingdom outside the European Union, and that should mean the very best deal for Scotland as well. I absolutely agree with him about the despicable acts of racism that have taken place, and let me reassure him as well that we'll take every step that we can. He asked questions specifically about interest rates. That is a matter for the Governor of the Bank of England and the Monetary Policy Committee, and they set out their views in advance of the referendum. He asked about budgets. That's going to be a matter for a future government. But let me say this to him. Scotland benefits from being in two single markets, the United Kingdom and the European single market. In my view, the best outcome is to try and keep Scotland in both.
Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first of all pay tribute to the Prime Minister for the dignity with which he addressed the nation from 10 Downing Street yesterday. Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend take a positive and simple message to the leaders of the other 27 member states at the European Council tomorrow, namely that the voters of the United Kingdom have demonstrated the value of that great principle the principle of democracy for which people fought and died.
Well, let me thank my honourable friend. Of course, when I go to the European Council tomorrow, I will report directly on the result and the decision of the British people, and no one should be in any doubt about that. But I think it's important that we set off on this path of exiting from the European Union with trying to build as much goodwill as possible on both sides.
Tim Farron.
Can I pay tribute to the Prime Minister following the announcement of his resignation on Friday? Of course, we haven't often agreed, but his commitment to historic bipartisanship during the coalition government and his energetic commitment to the Remain campaign contrasts favourably to the tribalism of others. He has my respect and my thanks. I also respect the outcome of the referendum, but I still feel passionately that Britain's interests are best served at the heart of Europe, in the European Union. I can accept defeat, but I will not give up. I have not changed my beliefs. With the promises of the Leave campaign unravelling and no leadership being shown by the opposition, will the Prime Minister confirm that free movement of people and access to the single market are paramount to the economic stability of Britain? And will he launch an investigation as to the whereabouts of the members for Uxbridge and Surrey Heath?
It's not up to me to ensure attendance in the chamber. I've got many responsibilities, but that's not one of them. Let me thank him for what he said about my leadership, and let me say how much I enjoyed appearing on a platform with him at the final rally outside Birmingham University, which brought together himself, myself and Gordon Brown in a unique but obviously unpersuasive trilogy. Although I have to say, Gordon Brown and the Right Honourable Member gave fantastic speeches. Look, I think he's right that the decision we're going to have to take, and it will be for the next government, about how we get the best possible access to the single market, I think that is going to be one of the single most important decisions that the government must take on, because we must bear in mind the importance of safeguarding our economy, its trade links and its jobs. And I think that will be a very serious consideration.
Mr. Crispin Blunt.
Much of the distress expressed by those who voted Remain on Thursday has been that they believe their country has turned its back on their values. Does the Prime Minister agree that they can be reassured that the tolerance, openness and Western liberal internationalism that we supported within the European Union will continue to be the hallmark of the United Kingdom as we seek a new role in the world?
Well, I very much hope my honourable friend is right. I think that is when Britain is at our strongest, when we stand up for our values and work with others. Let me stress that while we are leaving the European Union, we'll still be full members of NATO, the UN Security Council, the Commonwealth, the G7, the G20. Britain does best when we make our voice heard through these organisations, and we should continue to do so.
Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd wish a Tory Prime Minister would win a vote, but last Thursday I did, and I think the country will pay a bitter price for the fact that he lost this one. Leaving aside the constitutional turmoil, the damage to the economy and the uncertainty that hangs over Britain's place in the world, the leaders of the Brexit campaign have engendered an atmosphere where some people believe it is open season now for racism and xenophobia. Will the Prime Minister say very clearly that when it comes to the difficulties of getting a job or problems when it comes to the difficulties of getting a job or problems in the NHS or housing or in schools, that is the responsibility of his government to sort out, not the fault of migrants from the EU or indeed anywhere else?
Well, can I first of all praise the Right Honourable Lady for her decision to cross party lines and appear with others on platforms to make the argument, and she made them very persuasively, and I think it's right that she did. She's absolutely right that we must be very clear about our commitment to tolerance, to diversity, and our complete intolerance of racism and hateful hate crimes that we've seen in recent days. And I know that is the view of honourable members in this House, whatever side of the debate they were on, but that message needs to go out loud and clear.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Does the Prime Minister recall that when we held the vote in September last year on the EU referendum bill, not a single Conservative and only one Labour honourable member voted against it. So isn't it a bit late now for people to talk about blocking the implementation of the result just because they disagree with it? And finally, as it's always good to end on a positive note, would he care to bring in the vote for the Trident successor submarines before he leaves office?
I think it's very clear when it comes to numbers, he wants 4 submarines and 1 referendum. I think I've got the message very clearly. But he makes a good point, which is when the House voted on the referendum, it was by a margin of 6-1 to hold that referendum. We'll obviously be coming forward with our plan for all the other decisions that can be made during the remainder of this parliamentary session, and I would hope that it include the one he mentions.
Mr. Nick Clegg.
I'd like to add my thanks, obviously, to the Prime Minister for his service to the nation as 5 years the Prime Minister of a stable, successful coalition government. And throughout that time, there were many things that he and I disagreed on, but I always appreciated his civility, his good humour on display here again today, and his ability, which is rare in politics, to see politics from other people's points of view. And I think all of those qualities ensured the stability that was so necessary as the country was recovering from the economic shocks of 2008, and for that he should be warmly thanked. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I've heard a lot about democratic principle. Would he agree with me that it surely cannot be right, as a matter of democratic principle, that only members of the Conservative Party, constituting 0.003% of the total electorate, should be the only people who have a say to elect the new Prime Minister of a new government with new priorities utterly different to the ones he got elected on last year? Does he agree with me there should be an early general election?
Well, first of all, let me thank him for his kind words. We did work together, I think, very successfully, and I know that he paid a very large personal and political price for the support he gave to that government, which I do think helped to deliver economic stability and make real progress in our country, and I thank him for that. What I'd say to him about the leadership election that will now take place and the other points he put is, first of all parties have their rules for electing leaders that are arrived at democratically. We have ours, and they will be followed. And the only other point I'd make is that in the coalition agreement we agreed a fixed-term Parliament Act, which many of my colleagues have misgivings about. I happen to think it is a good measure, so as a result I think the right thing is for a new Prime Minister to take office, and it will be for them to decide whether to fulfil the terms of this Parliament or something else.
Sir Eric Pickle.
My right honourable friend will know that there are a large number of people in my constituency who work in the service industries, particularly the financial service industries. They've seen this weekend jobs leave this country. They're worried about their future. They need not to have access to the single market. They need to be a participatory part of the single market. And so does this country, as we currently have a £20 billion surplus. Will my honourable friend ensure that that is given the highest priority in the national interest in our negotiations?
Now, my right honourable friend makes an important point, and let me stress that nothing changes in the UK's trading relations with Europe until we actually leave the European Union. So there is a period where service companies, financial services, maintain that passport, and one of the most important tasks for the new government will be to negotiate the best possible arrangements with the single market, and that will be debated endlessly in this House. And there's obviously a very strong case for trying to remain in that single market in some form, but that's going to be a decision for the new government and for the Parliament.
Hilary Benn. Thank you very much.
As the process of leaving the European Union unfolds, we will continue to face a large number of international challenges, the crisis in Syria, climate change, and the threat of terrorism among them, and yet we risk seeing our voice in the world diminished. Does the Prime Minister agree that in the negotiations every effort should be made to ensure that we continue to have practical cooperation with our European allies so that we can maintain the kind of influence in the world that is so important to our prosperity and our security?
Well, he and I agree on this issue, and we spent some time on the campaign discussing it. What I would say is that it is important to use all of these forums to maximise Britain's influence, and we obviously will have to find a way under the new government to work out how to work with the European Union to get the maximum effect for the British stance on climate change, on Syria, on how we try and prevent refugees crossing, leaving Libya and all the rest of it. Those will all be issues for a future government, but I know from all that happened in the campaign is this is not about Britain withdrawing from the world or playing less of a role in the world, and we'll have to work out the way forward.
Nicola Blackwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to add my voice to the tributes to the Prime Minister from across this House. He is a true statesman who's made Oxfordshire proud, and we will miss him. But will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to reassure the science and innovation sector that the government will fight to protect access not just to Horizon 2020 funding, but also to valuable research collaborations, and also to effective recruitment and retention of the brightest and best of EU researchers? They are essential to our knowledge economy and deserve to know that they will be a priority in ongoing negotiations.
Well, I think this is one of the issues. Can I thank my honourable friend for her kind remarks, and it's been a great pleasure and a privilege being her constituency neighbour and working together. I think this issue of how we maintain the advances in British science and competitiveness of our universities will be one of the issues that this EU unit will want to look at, because clearly we've done very well out of this bit of the European Union, and so it will be for the new government to look at the evidence for that and how we can continue to move forward.
Kate Hoey.
Thank you. I would like to commend the Prime Minister for the way that he handled Friday and his very diplomatic and kind speech he's made today. I would say ask him to continue to show that leadership over the next month or two to ensure that some of the hysteria which has been around about what's going to happen to our country is actually kept under control. And could I ask him also to say today and to condemn very clearly those people who are almost implying that decent people all over this country who voted to leave the European Union are somehow closet racists.
Well, let me say I've been on the opposite side to the honourable lady in this debate, but I know it takes a lot of courage to stand out in the way that she has. I reflect that one of my first jobs in politics was as the Conservative candidate's researcher in the Vauxhall by-election, and if I'd known then that she'd be part of my nemesis, maybe I'd have worked even harder. But she's right. Look, there are many people on both sides of this debate who have very strong views about tolerance and about diversity and all the rest of it, and we need to make sure that shines through in the coming days.
Mr. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister knows, I haven't always agreed with him on issues, but as he equally knows, I've always been very supportive of him personally and didn't want him to make the announcement that he did last week. But having said that, will the Prime Minister agree with me that when he says the country needs to come together, and he's right to do so, does he accept that the first part of that is that everybody has got to accept the result of the referendum, whether they like it or not, and that talk of a second referendum is for the birds? And when he goes to see that his European counterparts, will he pass on the message that what the British people have said is that we're very happy to continue with our £68 billion trade deficit with the European Union by trading with them, but in return for that we're not prepared to accept free movement of people or contributing to the EU budget?
Well, he's absolutely right. We must accept the result, and the Cabinet has, and I think everybody should. But obviously what has to happen now is translating that result into action and choosing the correct pathway to leave the European Union and the correct relationship to have with it. And that's going to take a lot of complex decision-making by the new government, and he obviously has a very clear view about what that should involve. But it will involve a lot of separate and different decisions. But he's absolutely right. The decision must be accepted.
Meg Hillier.
Many of my constituents are European citizens, and they are fearful of their future. The Prime Minister has talked about a group of officials set up to determine what Brexit will mean. Can he give any comfort to these people? And if not now, can he give a timetable for when they will know how they can apply to remain in the UK?
Well, I think there will be many people watching this with exactly the same question that the Honourable Lady has answered. Look, the technically correct answer is that while we are members of the European Union, there's no change in the rights or the circumstances of people coming to live and work in Britain, or Britons going to live and work in other European Union countries. I think I would add to that that the Leave campaigners were fairly clear that they wanted to protect the rights of people who'd come to live and work and study who were already here. But obviously the final clarification of this and of the rights of British people living in other parts of the European Union will have to wait for the complex negotiations.
Mr. Owen Patterson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for giving the British people the opportunity to vote on this issue for the first time in decades? And can I thank those who voted to leave for giving me a remarkable birthday present on Friday? I also welcome the establishment of the new unit under the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. Does the Prime Minister intend to publish a white paper on the next steps?
No, I don't think that will be possible. I think what will happen is that this new unit got to get up and running, and it's got to go through all of the complex issues that need to be sorted out, whether about agriculture payments or borders or the situation in Northern Ireland, complex issues about which British laws need to be rewritten because they mention a lot of EU law and all the rest of it. And what I envisage happening is a series of papers being worked through, being discussed by the Cabinet and being prepared for the new government as it comes in.
Given the enormity of this decision and the repercussions of the negotiation process, the arrangements that he's described sound extremely weak. He's effectively saying that members of Parliament should just go and have an informal chat with the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. He is leaving a dangerous political vacuum. Can I urge him to look at much broader arrangements to build a wider consensus, including to set up a joint committee of both Houses of Parliament cross-party, to look at wider arrangements to involve voices from all across the country in what the negotiations about our future Britain alongside the EU should be, because Britain feels very divided now, and we, all of us, have a responsibility to build a new consensus for the future.
Well, I don't disagree with a lot of what the Right Honourable Lady is saying. I mean, obviously, Parliament will want to consider, and select committees will want to consider, how they can best produce evidence and take research and take interviews to add to this process. I see the role of the government is to... It's clear we are moving from one situation, membership of the EU, to leaving the EU, and we need to describe in a dispassionate and neutral and objective way what all the different outcomes look like and what are the advantages and disadvantages of all the different outcomes. You know, the trade deal like Canada, the situation like Norway, the pros and cons of being in the single market or out of the single market. So people, our constituents, can actually see what are the disadvantages and advantages in each case. That's what the government should do, but the Parliament, the House of Commons, can also play its part too.
Mr. Speaker, may I also pay tribute to my right honourable friend for giving the British people the chance to take this historic decision. May I also share his view that Britain will continue to be engaged with the rest of the world, I hope in a more positive fashion. But may I also express the view I'm very disappointed that my right honourable friend has decided to stand down, and I wonder at this difficult time he might not like to reconsider that decision. I say so because he is a star at the dispatch box, and furthermore, as he's demonstrated today, he'll rather miss it if he's not here to do it.
I'm sure there are many things I will miss, and statements that go on for at least 3 hours perhaps are one of them. What on earth will I do to fill my time? But the reason for my decision to resign is that the country has made a very clear decision to go in a particular direction. And I really do believe it needs someone, fresh leadership, fresh pair of eyes, committed to that path and to getting it right for Britain. And I think that does require change, and that's why I made the decision I did, and I've certainly not changed my mind.
Talking of which, at 9 o'clock this morning, the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge welcomed the stabilisation of the pound. At lunchtime, sterling fell to a 31-year low against the dollar. If you break it, you own it. So who owns this particular adjustment? Is it the Prime Minister who called the referendum, or the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge who exploited it?
I'll be very frank. Look, the government was elected on a manifesto promise to hold a referendum. We've held that referendum. The country's made its decision, and this government is responsible now for setting out the steps that we need to take and for doing all that's necessary to stabilise the economy. We took a choice to ask the people this very big question, because I believe in our parliamentary democracy, but when it comes to the very big decisions, I think it's right to consult the people. But the government, this government, takes responsibilities.
Baron, in respecting with dignity the wishes of the electorate, does the Prime Minister accept that he has an absolute pivotal role to play in encouraging all sides to come together and talk the country up? Calm optimism is now required. We are a great country and we have a very bright future ahead of us.
Well, I certainly believe we all have a responsibility to bring the country together and to make this new pathway work as well as it does. But we have to do it from a position of realism. We don't know exactly what some of the economic and other effects will be, so we're going to have to take great caution and care in the coming days and the coming weeks to respond to that, as well as coming together to get the best pathway for our country to leave this organisation.
Christopher Leslie.
Friday, the Leader of the Opposition suggested we should rush to invoke Article 50 renegotiations now. I disagree. I believe that it would be in the good, sound order for our economy to secure a stable transition, to make sure that that Article 50 is not triggered until at least the new year.
Well, the triggering of Article 50 is a matter for the British government. I think it's important we establish that. I think what matters is that we do as much work as possible to determine the best possible model that we want to try and negotiate, and that must be a matter for the new Prime Minister, and then he or she will make that decision to trigger Article 50.
Matt Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Boston, in my constituency, voted more than any other place in the country to leave the European Union, and it has seen the highest level of immigration from Eastern Europe in this country. I am keenly aware that those migrants are my constituents too. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that we owe it to the will of those people that live in my constituency to deliver on the promises to reform immigration and increase spending on the NHS if we are to retain their faith in this place?
Well, I think what we must continue to do is to enact our manifesto promises, one of which was to set up an immigration impact fund, and we need to set that up and establish it, hopefully on an all-party basis. We should continue to deliver for the NHS, as we promised on our manifesto, and we have done so. But clearly one of the key issues in this negotiation is how to try and balance those difficult decisions about access to the single market and better control of immigration, and I think that will go to the heart of what the country needs to do.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister and I were on different sides of this argument, but when he spoke on Friday, he did so with his dignity, his principle and his honour intact. I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for indicating that discussions will commence this week on the common travel area, but can I ask the Prime Minister to dismiss the notion that there could be a border poll in Northern Ireland, to dismiss the notion that devolved institutions can wield a veto on this process, and to resolve that only with the collective will to do what's in our national interest will we maintain this United Kingdom.
Well, first of all, can I thank him for his kind remarks? I think he's right to say it's important we get the issues around the common travel area right. They are complex, they are difficult if Northern Ireland is going to be the frontier between the United Kingdom outside the European Union and the European Union. On the issue of a border poll, the rules for that are set out very clearly in the Good Friday Agreement, and I don't believe they have been triggered. And in terms of the decision to leave the EU and how we do it, that is principally a matter for this Westminster United Kingdom Parliament.
Mr. Bob Neill.
The Prime Minister has shown decency and courage that my predecessor, Harold Macmillan, would have respected. I think Harold Macmillan would have wept for the day that this has happened and the day that the Prime Minister departs. Will he concede that it's very clear legally that Article 50 is the only proper means of exiting from the European Union, that any attempt to circumvent that will be wrong and will involve this country in a breach of its international obligations, which no decent leader of this country should ever contemplate?
Well, let me thank my honourable friend for his remarks. He's right that the only legal way set out to leave the EU is by triggering Article 50, and that is clearly what our partners want us to do, although not all of them believe that we have to do it immediately, and that is why I think we have some time to examine the right model we want to negotiate for and then pull that trigger. But it is, as I understand it, the only legal way that the job can get done.
Pat McFadden.
During the campaign, we heard quite a lot of criticism about politicians, elites and experts. So can I ask the Prime Minister about a promise made by the Leave side just this morning? The Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip has said he wants to maintain full access to the single market. Can the Prime Minister name a country that has full access to the single market, but which does not also have to accept free movement of people?
Well, I think that the technical answer to the right honourable gentleman's question is that there isn't a country today that has full access to the single market without contributing to the budget or accepting free movement of people. But I think that where we should try to seek some cross-party agreement here is I think it's in all our interests, whatever the eventual decision, to make sure that we are as close as possible economically to our friends and partners in the European Union. That is obviously going to have to be negotiated, and personally, my view is that the closer the better.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As somebody of Polish origin, I'm very proud of the contribution that Poles have made to this country, not just during the Battle of Britain, where the Polish 303 Squadron was one of the largest, but also in recent years. As chairman of the All-Party Group for Poland, I have invited the chairman of the Polish Cultural Centre to come to the House of Commons to show solidarity with them after that appalling attack, and I very much hope the Prime Minister will potentially join us for that meeting.
Well, let me commend my honourable friend for his work with the Polish community here in the United Kingdom and for furthering relations between Britain and Poland. I spoke to the Polish Prime Minister this afternoon to say how concerned I was about the terrible attacks that had taken place and to reassure her that we were doing everything we could to protect Polish citizens in our country. Poland is obviously a country that's very sad to see Britain leave the European Union, because we're like-minded on so many issues about open markets and enterprise and the Atlanticist nature of the European Union, but we must make sure we work for the strongest bilateral relationship between Britain and Poland in the years ahead.
Gisela Stewart.
Can I commend the Prime Minister on the way he's accepted the verdict of a United Kingdom-wide referendum? And I think the rest of the House should accept that verdict the way he has. When it comes to implementing it, could he tell the House whether he intends to replace our Commissioner and whether he intends to set up a special unit at UKREP as well?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate the Honourable Lady and the role she played in the campaign as a very key spokesman for that side of the argument. On the issue of the Commissioner, first of all, let me pay tribute to Jonathan Hill, to Lord Hill, who worked incredibly hard in the European Commission. I'm very sad to see him go. I think we should try to seek a replacement, because the fact is we are a full member of this organisation, a contributing member, a paying member until we leave, and so therefore we should have a Commissioner. But I'm sure that will be a challenge. As for UKREP in Brussels, it's ably led by Sir Ivan Rogers, and I hope that he will remain in place and continue to give the excellent advice he's given to ministers to date.
Mr. Simon Hoare.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whilst the Honourable Lady for Vauxhall is right, I make no apology from this side of the House to bring my right honourable friend back to the topic of racism that we've seen since Thursday. When a tweet can be sent to a young black woman in London which says, "Go home, #we voted leave, time to make Britain great again by getting rid of you blacks, Asians and immigrants," a genie appears to be let out of the bottle. Unintended, I am certain, by both sides of the referendum campaign. Could I ask my right honourable friend two specific questions? First, that the police and the prosecuting authorities have the resources to bring cases against perpetrators of this vile racism. And secondly, to use his good offices with the leaderships of both of the referendum campaigns to call out this abuse for what it is and to bring a stop to it now.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. This is hideous language that we thought we had banished from our country, and it's very important that everyone comes out and condemns this as strongly as possible. On his specific questions, first of all, the police do have resources because we protected their budgets. They do have the necessary laws as well to prosecute hate crimes. And on the issue of both campaigns, as far as I'm concerned, these campaigns no longer exist. There is now one government with one view, which is we have to find the right path for the future. And I think the sooner we can do that, the better.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am proud to say publicly that I voted for Britain to remain in the European Union. I'm sure the Prime Minister would too. But I also respect and recognise that people across this House voted differently. All of us now need to help those at the sharp end of this decision. So can he tell us specifically what measures his government is going to put in place for all those small businesses who are now facing a loss or a pause in contracts as a result of the decision on Thursday?
Well, the Business Secretary has been consulting with businesses throughout the campaign, but obviously has stepped that up and is having a very large meeting with businesses tomorrow. I'll be doing more of that later in the week. The true position is this, that as long as we are in this organisation until we exit, all the rules about trade, about services, about financial passports, about access to markets, none of those change. And obviously what needs to happen now, informed by the work of this EU unit, is that we seek the very best possible deal to make sure that businesses can still benefit from access to European markets.
Mrs. Cheryl Gillan.
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England have commendably acted swiftly to restore calm to the markets and confidence in our country and our economy. However, the Prime Minister knows there are many people leading voters to believe that a second referendum is possible and that it could be rerun on different rules. What would the Prime Minister say to those people who are encouraging others to believe that that is a possibility?
Well, I think people won't be surprised to hear that I'm not planning a second referendum. I think we have to accept the result, we have to get on and deliver it, and as we do so, we have to seek the best possible deal, and obviously this House should be involved in that process.
Caroline Flint.
Speaker, thank you. The scare stories about immigration that were spoken about by people leading the Leave campaign and outriders were frankly shameful. But we do have a divided country between our cities and small-town Britain, for whom immigration was the #1 issue. Beyond an impact fund, which I support, although I was sorry to see it abolished some years ago, can the Prime Minister assure me that in the weeks before the House rises and over the summer, we can look more deeply into what are the pressures on our small-town communities, the pressures in different employment sectors, some of the abuses that are going on, the increase on housing and rents? And could I just gently say to the Prime Minister, I am somewhat surprised in his statement that the new EU unit in Whitehall does not include the Home Office.
Well, first of all, on her last point, obviously this new EU unit is going to be working with every department because, of course, every department is affected by this decision. The Home Office will be playing an absolute leading role in trying to work out what the options are for leaving the EU but maintaining good levels of cooperation over crime and borders and information and terrorism and all the rest of it. And that, I think, is very useful work that can be done before my successor takes office. Look, I agree with her that immigration was an absolutely key issue in this election. And I think we have to look as a country what more we can do to help people to integrate in our country, to examine the pressures on various public services. I made a series of suggestions about welfare changes, which now won't be coming in, which I'm obviously sad about, but we need to find some alternatives to those to reassure people that we can have a good and fair and managed system for immigration, both from outside the EU and from inside the EU.
Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All I would like to do today is to thank my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for his years of service to the party and the country, and say that I hope, had the result been the other way round, my side would have behaved with the dignity and nobility that he has shown.
Can I thank my honourable friend for his kind remarks and the spirit in which they were given?
Mike Gapes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that there is now collective government and cabinet responsibility. In that context, can I ask him, can he say on behalf of the member for Surrey Heath and the member for Uxbridge that we will have a vote in this House before Article 50 is triggered?
Well, first of all, on a technical issue, the member for Uxbridge is not a member of the government. Important point. But in answer to his question very directly, I can't give that guarantee. The issue for triggering Article 50, the decision will be for the next Prime Minister and the next Cabinet, and the arrangements they put in place must be for them to decide.
Not responsible for the member for Uxbridge and South Ruisley. He's probably quite pleased he's not responsible for him. Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister must take great credit for delivering the referendum and great credit for the way he campaigned, because undoubtedly the Remain vote was higher because of that, and also the way he has reacted afterwards. Could I ask the Prime Minister, we were talking just now about collective responsibility, will all his ministers now be behind the Prime Minister in leaving the EU? And there is some talk today, sir, that the exit of the Prime Minister will be earlier now, sometimes around the end of August. Could he comment on that as well?
On collective responsibility, I meant what I said. Obviously, it was suspended for the period of this campaign, but it has now come back into place, and so members of the government, members of the Cabinet are of one view, and that one view must be that we deliver the country's will to exit the European Union, although the key decisions for that are going to be taken by the next Prime Minister. As for the arrangements for the leadership election in the Conservative Party, there are all sorts of bodies, the 22, the party board and all the rest of it, who will make decisions. I am your servant, as it were. I want to make sure that we have stability and continuity in government of this country, and that we take the necessary steps to stabilise things, but I know that the right thing to do is to hand over to a new team and a new leader to take these issues forward.
Mr. Liam Byrne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the emphasis the Prime Minister now puts on coming back together as a community? There are people now living in fear in the way the Honourable Member for North Dorset described, and it is down to us to put the decency back into our democracy. But can the Prime Minister now understand the rage that many feel at what appear to be myth-truths told about the virtues of coming out of the European Union, such as, for example, an extra £350 million a week for the National Health Service? So can I press the Prime Minister on the answer that he gave to my right honourable friend, the member for Pontefract? We are about to go into some of the most dangerous waters this country has ever entered. It would be strange if in this House we carried on with arrangements as if business was just going on as usual. Transparency is the best guarantee against any more myth-truths. Surely our parliamentary arrangements must be strengthened to provide oversight of the right arrangements for leaving the European Union.
Well, first of all, he's right that we need to, as he put it, get the decency into our democracy. He's right that we must stamp out this hatred and intolerance. But I don't believe we need to go and refight the referendum campaign all over again. Where I will reflect on what he said, what the Honourable Member for Pontefract has said, is, look, of course, I think there's a very big task for government and for Parliament to set out and examine in an objective and fact-based way what are the alternative models for leaving the European Union. What are the advantages, what are the disadvantages? And I do think this House has got a big role. Whether it needs a new joint committee or whether it's the existing select committees, I'm very happy to receive advice and ideas from honourable members. But certainly this House should play a proper role in informing the public and making sure we get the decision right.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is absolutely right that all of us who voted on the Remain side must accept the result of the referendum and do our best to implement it as well as possible. And can I say that the manner and tone of his resignation speech and statement today is absolutely in keeping with the unifying one nation tourism which he has done so much to advocate. Mr. Speaker, amongst the divisions left in the wake of the referendum is one where many young people feel let down by their parents and grandparents. Would my right honourable friend agree that in the weeks ahead with the current government, that the government seizes all opportunities to reassure young people that the opportunities and benefits which many of them see in Europe will still be available for them after the process of leaving the European Union?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes an important point. We must accept the result, but I think during this process of debate and discussion involving Parliament and government, there'll be many arguments that people want to look at for how we exit the EU and the relationship we have at the end. What would it mean for young people in terms of travelling, working, studying? And these are all questions. Now we're not talking about theoretical alternatives to membership. We're actually talking about the actual alternatives to membership. We need the maximum amount of detail and transparency and debate so people can make their voices heard.
I'm keen to accommodate colleagues, but there is a premium on brevity to be exemplified, as always, by Mr Douglas Carswell.
I applaud the Prime Minister and I welcome his statement. Now that withdrawal from the European Union is the policy of Her Majesty's government, can the Prime Minister confirm that some of the architects of the Vote Leave campaign, not just the Europhile mandarins, will be involved in the work of the new Cabinet Office unit?
Yeah, Farage.
Well, first of all, obviously the government and the cabinet includes many people who are prominent in both campaigns. But as I've said, the campaigns are now over. There is one government policy. But let me take issue with him about our civil servants. They are impartial, they are hard-working, they are the best of British, they do a very fine job, and I'm sure they will help us deliver this incredibly important and difficult challenge.
Whatever the final form of our exit negotiations from the European Union take, it is clear to everyone that we'll need to strengthen our trading relationships with other economies around the world. The Prime Minister is right to set up this EU exit unit in the Cabinet Office, but what steps is he taking to supercharge the business department so we can have a team of crack trade officials to start negotiating such trade agreements?
Yeah, very well. That's exactly the sort of issue we will be looking at, but of course it may be the case that we have to negotiate our exit from the EU first before being able to make a lot of those arrangements. But we should certainly be doing the research, doing the work. The Foreign Office can help with this, the trade envoys can help with this, as can the Business Department itself.
Can I say to the Prime Minister that I saw very closely the work he did during the riots, and I'm very grateful for that. He will recognise that some of my constituents are amongst the poorest in Britain. In these very tough economic times, it is the poorest that will suffer. And does he recognise that young people, poor people, and actually many middle-class people who voted to remain want a plan, and that lies behind the call for a second referendum on the detail?
As I've said, what I think needs to happen is that we have to set out the options for the model of leaving. The next government will make those decisions, and the next government will have to confront the issue that he raises of how to involve Parliament in those decisions. But that's going to be something for them and for Parliament, and not for me.
Latham.
Could I echo many people's comments that the Prime Minister has been a tremendous leader, for not just for this country, but also for the party. And if it wasn't for him, we would not have such a diverse field of members of Parliament behind him. But could I also say that in my constituency in roundabout Derby and Derbyshire, many businesses are concerned that trade missions abroad will be put on hold. Could we make sure that in this period when we are still in Europe, that those missions that were planned before could continue, because we must continue to work for this country?
I thank my honourable friend for her kind remarks. I can certainly give her the assurance that trade missions will continue. If anything, they need to be stepped up.
Frankfield.
Might I take the Prime Minister back to the resignation of our European Commissioner? Given the importance of this role, might we expect that he will make a replacement within days rather than months?
I'm moving on this as fast as we can. Obviously, the process of getting your Commissioner appointed includes hearings of the European Parliament and all the rest of it. But as I say, as a full-paying, full member, I think we're entitled to have a Commissioner.
Mark Menzies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I put on record my sincere thanks to the Prime Minister for the support he's given to BAE Systems and the 6,500 men and women. Many of them are apprentices and graduates who work at the BAE Systems facility in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has visited that plant more often than all of his predecessors combined, such is the level of his dedication. And can I ask the Prime Minister some reassurance that people who work on the Typhoon Eurofighter and work pan-European, that this government will continue to do everything we can to secure their futures?
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend's remarks. I will continue to do everything I can to support BAE Systems. I enjoyed watching Typhoons fly over Cleethorpes on Armed Forces Day on Saturday, and I'll continue to work as hard as I can to make sure we secure orders abroad.
Ryan.
Mr. Speaker, the Mayor for London has rightly expressed his concerns about the consequences of Brexit will have on the London economy, jobs and growth, and clearly that's a concern for the whole country. Given that the financial sector relies on retaining passporting rights to the European market, will the government guarantee that this will be a top priority for negotiations with the EU? And does the Prime Minister agree with the Mayor for London that London needs a seat at the table for the forthcoming negotiations with the EU?
Well, as I said in my statement, the Mayor of London, the London Assembly should be involved. Financial services are 7% of our economy. 2/3 of the jobs are actually outside London. Access to the single market is vital. And so I hope they will make their voice heard very strongly in making sure we seek the closest possible relationship economically with Europe.
Scully.
Economic priorities must be to settle short-term uncertainty and position ourselves to make the most of opportunities in the long term. But whilst digesting the referendum result and commenting on a way forward, will my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, agree with me that we should concentrate on our economy's strong fundamentals and not talk our economy and our country down?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We must talk up our strengths, and they continue to be the case, but we do need to be realistic in meeting the challenges and difficulties that we will face.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Treasury Select Committee, in its report into our membership of the European Union, looked at the short-run risks and volatility. Much of that is now manifesting itself with the sharp fall in sterling, the volatility on the stock exchange, and with government bond yields at an all-time low. What actions are the government taking now to protect British jobs, growth and living standards?
Well, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. The Treasury Select Committee did look at this and warned of the volatility, and we have seen a lot of that volatility. You've seen a Bank of England and Treasury reaction. As well as the volatility, we have to look out for the dangers of uncertainty, and the government stands ready to help in any way it can. Part of this will be reassuring business that all the trading relationships continue while we are in this negotiation, but she's right to say these are going to be challenges ahead.
The right honourable and lady gentleman has only just started bobbing, but I think we should hear him. A double bob, indeed. Mr. Dominic Grieve.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while we have to accept and must accept the referendum decision, is it not the case that the problem that we run is that in the course of the campaign, statements have been made by those advocating vote leave, which are firstly false and secondly, in many cases, unfulfillable? Isn't one of the things that came out so clearly from this referendum campaign the increasing disconnect between the public and those of us in this House who are in authority, as they would see it, in authority? What can we do and what should we be doing to restore that trust? I have to say to my right honourable friend, who has behaved impeccably in this matter, and to whom I would like to pay thanks for his long service to this country, that if we do not restore that trust, then it seems to me that the role of this House is fatally undermined.
The gentleman has spoken for his chum as well.
Not no.
Oh, well.
Let me thank my right honourable friend for his kind remarks. I think he's right that one of the concerns that came through in this referendum is that people are very disaffected with, obviously, politics and politicians, but also expert opinion as well. And I think what we need to do now is recognise we're moving from describing a situation we have today and a number of hypothetical situations to now real choices. And I think this is where perhaps this House and the government and all the rest of it can come into their own, with setting out in a very cool and neutral way what these alternatives are and what the costs and benefits are, and then perhaps we can restore some of the trust.
This morning, the Chancellor said that action to address the impact of the referendum on our economy and public finances won't be taken until the autumn.
At a time of such risk and uncertainty, and with continuing weaknesses in our economy, I find that staggering. So will the Prime Minister reconsider this decision and bring forward a proper plan, particularly to secure the private and public sector investment that our economy will need to weather the incoming storm?
Yeah. What I'd say to the Honourable Lady is I think the Chancellor was referring to the idea of there being fiscal measures that might be necessary if the economic impacts of leaving are as bad as some of the independent forecasters suggested. So it was the idea of some form of budget that he was referring to. The government stands ready, with the Bank of England and others, to take any necessary measures to help create the stability in markets that might be necessary.
Mr. David Nuttall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly thank my right honourable friend for his statement today? I've long hoped for this day ever since I stood right here and first moved the motion that there should be a referendum on our membership of the European Union back on the 24th of October in 2011. Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend, what does he think it says about the nature of the European Union that several member countries reportedly want to punish the UK simply because a majority of people had the temerity to vote to leave it?
Well, first of all, let me congratulate my honourable friend on his long campaign. I would say to him that I think when we look at the reaction of the European Union to these events, we should be very careful not to entirely take it through the filter of media outlets that want only to see one reaction. Actually, what I'm sensing from the conversations I've had with the Germans, the French, the Poles, the Italians and others is they are genuinely sad to see the United Kingdom go. They genuinely want to have a good and strong relationship with us when we leave. But obviously they, like us, have to think of their own interests just as we think of our own interests. So the fact that the 27 member states are going to be meeting without the United Kingdom after the European Council, we shouldn't see that as surprising. In fact, many of us said that would happen were we to leave, because obviously we'll fight like mad for our interests, but they will fight for theirs. What we've got to try and do is try to convince them and try to maintain in ourselves good and open and strong relations with them, so that actually this becomes a dialogue leading to a mutually beneficial result rather than a war of words or something worse that then leads to a painful divorce.
Pete Wishart.
The Prime Minister's response to my right honourable friend, the member for Murray, was quite simply woeful. Scotland overwhelmingly voted to remain within the European Union, 62%, every local authority in Scotland. We value our EU membership. We are a European nation. What does he now say to the people of Scotland who believe that we should remain within the European Union? What do we do now?
Well, what we do now is to make sure we get the very best outcome from this negotiation, so it's good for the United Kingdom and good for Scotland. And it's all very well him waving his finger, but that is actually what matters most to the people of Scotland.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to my right honourable friend for his leadership over many years and thank him for that? Could I also pay tribute to the German Chancellor for her measured and wise words over the weekend, which I believe has set a good tone for the negotiations? And could I ask my right honourable friend what measures are being taken to ensure that we strengthen bilateral relations right now between us and all other 27 other members of the European Union, now that we will not be dealing with them through the filter of the European Union in future?
Well, let me thank my honourable friend for his kind remarks. Obviously, one of the great roles of the Foreign Office going forward is to concentrate on those bilateral relations, even as we conduct this very complicated and difficult negotiation. We do have embassies in every single European country. We do have strong bilateral relations. With my negotiation, I was the first British Prime Minister to visit some of the further flung parts of the European Union, and I'll certainly, in whatever capacity, do everything I can to keep those bilateral relations strong, because that will help in our negotiation for our future in Europe.
Kevin Brennan.
I belatedly picked up a leaflet this morning in my London flat, which was the official leaflet of the Leave campaign, which said that the NHS could get an extra £350 million per week as a result of the vote to leave. Can the Prime Minister tell us when the NHS can expect to receive that money?
I think obviously, until we leave the European Union, we will continue with our contributions to the European Union, and at that moment, my successor will have to explain where the money's going.
Roberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The City of London boasts some of the best global lawyers anywhere in the world. Can I urge the Prime Minister that he speak to the Law Society of Scotland, the Law Society of Northern Ireland and the Law Society of England and Wales to ensure that we get the very best British lawyers who will undertake part of the negotiation team's efforts?
But my honourable friend makes an important point. When I talk about this EU unit, which obviously going to have the best and brightest from the civil service, it's also important we get the best and brightest from the private sector, whether it's lawyers or financial experts or trade experts. We want all of this expertise to come forward in what is going to be a massive national endeavour.
I understand why there are courteous prefaces to many questions, and that, I think, is appreciated in the House. But now it really would be useful if we could just have single, short, supplementary questions, because the Prime Minister is giving admirably succinct replies. Chukaramuna.
Short, succinct question, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister think precipitating a collapse in the value of sterling, a fall in the value of our equities, and a suspension of trading in our banks amounts to Britain taking back control?
I think I've said there are financial consequences that we need to manage in the days and the weeks ahead.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question, my right hand friend, the member for Beaconsfield, does the Prime Minister accept that there was a very clear prospectus sold to the electorate who voted to leave, which included an explicit promise to end unskilled migration from the European Union? This was explicit. This is what they voted for. Does he believe that can be delivered?
Well, I think one of the greatest challenges, as I said, is going to be negotiating the best possible access to the single market and balancing the issue of the best management and control of migration. That is going to be a decision for the future Prime Minister. It will be one of the most important that he or she and the Cabinet will have to take.
Mr. Ian Murray.
78% of voters in my constituency voted to remain, in no small part due to the contribution the EU makes to both higher education and the large financial services sector in Edinburgh. What is the Prime Minister doing to reassure my constituents and constituents all over this country of the uncertainty that he has created by calling this referendum in the period up to the Article 50 being introduced to this House, after the Article 50 and beyond Brexit? Because there's uncertainty and they're worried about their jobs and their future livelihoods.
What I'd say is, first of all, we have to respect the outcome of the referendum. I think it's right not to trigger Article 50 because that starts a process that within 2 years has to result in an exit, and it might be an unmanaged exit if it started too soon. But to people working in financial services, including the 100,000 that work in Edinburgh and Glasgow, a very important part of our economy, we need to work as hard as we can, and including Aberdeen, we need to, including Aberdeen Asset Management, to give them a plug as well. We have to do everything we can to get the best possible access to the single market.
A single eloquent sentence from an illustrious QC, Sir Edward Garnier.
In addition to the work that the unit of the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster will be doing to look outwards into the European Union and our relation with that, will he also look at the preservation of the United Kingdom?
Yes.
Doubly splendid. Paula Sheriff.
Like many others across this House, I've been saddened and deeply distressed to hear of some terrible racist and xenophobic incidents recently. In fact, during the course of this debate, I've been sent a message to say a young lady in my constituency has been told to go home. This is her home and she is very welcome here. Will the Prime Minister therefore agree to reconvene an urgent meeting of a cross-party commission to look at race hate crimes and how we can eradicate this cancer from our society?
She's absolutely right in the point she makes, and as for the organisation she mentions, I'll look into it.
Mr. Robin Walker.
Speaker. One of the greatest achievements of this Prime Minister has been to make the job of eliminating youth unemployment no longer an impossible dream but an achievable mission. Like him, I agree that may have become more challenging, but like him, I agree we must accept the outcome of this referendum. Would he agree that whoever is his successor, he or she should ensure that the opportunities for young people and their life chances are at the heart of our mission?
Hear, hear. Hear. I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. One of the challenges, whatever route we take through this difficult pathway of access to the single market and control of migration, one of the best ways to control migration is to increase the apprenticeships and opportunities to our own young people in our own country to fulfil the jobs that our economy is creating.
Third.
Key industries in my constituency, notably agriculture and fish processing, face very challenging times because they rely on European market access and also depend quite heavily on migrant workers to meet labour shortages. The Scottish Government is already meeting with stakeholders in an attempt to steer through these turbulent times. But what is the Government doing to shore up confidence in these sectors? And can the Prime Minister give us any indication when he will be in a position to indicate what the status of EU workers will be